In this video, we'll see how to convert the GuestBook web application from using just servlets to the MVC architecture. So this is the GuestBook web application. Currently, it only has 4 servlets and a model class. So it already has a model class GuestBook entry. There's no need to do any model part. We'll concentrate on doing controllers and views. So just brush up a little bit on the application itself. There's this GuestBook servlet. In the init method, we create a couple of GuestBook entries for testing, and in the doGet method, we create a table, and then for each entry, we create a table row, and we also print out a few links, so later on we can connect to the add comment servlet, edit entry, and delete entry servlet. So if we run this, and we can see this is what it looks like. Two pre-created entries and displayed inside the table. For each entry, we have an edit link, we have a delete link, and we also have an add comment link that we can add new comments. So let's first convert this one into MVC. As I mentioned, we already have the model class. No need to change there. And we already have a servlet, which serves as a controller. And most of this code is actually okay. It's supposed to be done in the controller, so we leave all of those there. And the only thing we have to change is here. In a MVC architecture, controllers are not supposed to generate views directly. That's the views job. So we need to move all of this into a JSP. So let's create that JSP. Doesn't really matter how we name it, but I usually try to name my JSP the same as the controller servlet, so it's easier to find them. And also, I like to put JSPs under webinf so that users cannot access them directly without going through the controllers. Let's create the JSP, and I'm going to call it GuestBook JSP, of course. And we are going to use JSTL in order to loop through all the GuestBook entries. So to do that, we'll need the JSTL tag library. Let me copy over that taglib directive, which is this one. And we'll say GuestBook here. Okay, so what's inside here will be pretty much the same as before, except that we no longer need to use a bunch of print statements. So we'll have a table, and let's give it a border so we can see it. And then for each entry, we need to produce one row with the entry name and the entry message. So in Java, that's a for loop, and in JSP, of course, we are going to use a for each tag. For each tag has 2 important attributes, items and the var. Var is easy. It's simply the name of the variable for each iteration, and we can simply call it entry. Now, item is supposed to the collection of GuestBook entries we are going to iterate through. Note that we already saved that collection in application scope, which means we can access this anywhere in our application in both servlets and JSPs, which means, in other words, we can simply say entries, and this will give us the collection of entries in application scope. Once again, remember to use expression here, because here it needs to be a collection. If you forget to use the expression syntax, notice that it simply becomes a string. It's no longer a collection, so there's nothing to iterate over. Okay, so now we have the for each tag, and then inside it, we will create a row for each entry, and each row will have three columns. The first column should be name and says. In order to get the name out of an entry object, notice that inside servlet we say get name, but name, of course, is a property, same as message and ID. So here we can simply say entry dot name says. This gives us the first column, and the second column would be the message. So this will give us the second column. And the third column should be two links, one for editing and one for deleting. And each of them has a request parameter ID. So it will look something like this. We can say href edit entry question mark ID and entry.id. Again, here it used to be getID, but we can simply say entry.id because ID is a property. And the whole URL is edit entry question mark ID, and we can embed an expression inside this string. So this gives us this part, and then we can say delete is simply delete entry, same thing here, delete, and that's pretty much it. Edit entry, delete entry. Okay, so we'll need one more link for add comment. Let's put it here, and I usually prefer using double quotes if possible or convenient. And so this is it. As we can see, this is pretty much the same as this, except that now it's a lot more readable. The code is much more clear what it does. There's no more print statements. There's no more escaping single quotes, double quotes, string concatenation, making things hard to understand and hard to maintain. Nice and simple. So now we can get rid of all this code and replace it with simply request, get request dispatcher the path to the JSP, which is webinf / guestbook JSP. Forward, request, and response. You can get rid of that too. Okay, so although we have one more file to manage, but overall the code becomes a lot cleaner and a lot more readable. And if we refresh here, we can see that it looks pretty much the same as before. And just to make sure we are looking at the new guestbook, let's add guestbook here. So it says guestbook. It is indeed using the new JSP. So a couple of things here. First, if the data is already in application scope, there's no need to pass the data. JSP can access data in application scope directly. And the second, this is how we combine JSTL tags with HTML template text. Just use them as if they are loop statement, and inside put in the HTML and combine HTML with expression language when necessary. Okay, so now we are done with guestbook, and let's change this one, add comment. The process is pretty much the same. We still keep the servlet as a controller, but we move all the code that generates HTML into a JSP. So here we will create a new JSP, and again I like to name it the same as my controller, so I'll call it add comment.jsp, and add comment. This JSP really is just a form, so we don't even need the JSTL. So just create a form, looks like this. Let me copy over this one. So it's going to be called add comment, and we can even get rid of that because it will post back to the same URL. And inside we have name, which is the input, and this one will be text, this one will be called name, and then we will have a text area, and this one will be called message. Actually, I can just leave it as single quote, but I'm a little bit OCD about those type of things. And let's put button here. Okay, so now we have the form. Once again, a lot cleaner looking than before. And now we can get rid of all this and simply again do a request get dispatcher forward to forward the request to the actual view, and this one will be called add comment. Now we do have a second method here, doPost. Inside doPost, it will process the form submission. It will create a new entry and then redirect to GuestBook. All these, in fact, are what controllers are supposed to do. So this part is the processing part. It literally is processing a form submission. Of course, it should be here. And this part is, in fact, returning a view. And here, the view is redirect. Redirect is considered a special view. So, in fact, there's nothing needs to be changed in doPost. doPost is a controller. It processes a request and then returns a view. And in this case, the view is simply redirect. Let's try that and click on Add Comment. It works. Again, to make sure that we are in fact using the new GSP, let me add comment here. If we refresh, we see that it is indeed using the GSP. If you look at the URL, you can see that request is actually sent to the controller, and the controller forward the request to GSP, which is how it's supposed to be. And then let's say Tom says hi, and everything still works. That's because the post part we didn't even need to change. It still handles the submission, create a new entry, redirect to GuestBook. So now we are done with the second operation with all the controllers and views. Then let's look at edit. Inside edit, what we did was get an ID from request parameter, locate an entry from application scope using that ID, and then create a form that has the current information of the entry inside, plus a hidden form field ID. Again, let's create this one first. One thing you may have noticed, or you may have guessed, is that an edit form is oftentimes pretty much the same as an add form. So we can simply make a copy of this and just make some changes. So we'll change this one to edit entry, and this one to edit entry, and we can just say post and name, and here we want to have the value, and here we also want to have the current message, and then we can say save. And one more thing we want is a hidden form field that says hidden name is ID and value is the ID of the current entry. So in terms of HTML form, it looks pretty much like the add comment. The only thing is that we need to get the information of the current entry. Inside the controller, we already found the current entry. If you remember, in a model view controller architecture, the controller is supposed to pass data to a view in order for the view to display. And the way to pass data is to do request set attribute. And then we can give it a name. Doesn't really matter which name we use, but might as well use entry as the name. So now we have the data. We can then forward the request to the GSP or to the view. So that is again get request dispatcher. This time is edit entry.jsp, and then we do forward request and response. So we can get rid of the rest of it. And since we have the hidden field, let me put the action here. And because the controller passes the data to this view, now this view will have access to an entry object. And here, of course, we would want to do entry.id. Here, we would want to do entry.name. And here, we would want to do entry.message. So let's see if it works. Go back to GuestBook and let's edit this. It says webinf edit enry.jsp not found. You'll see fall for error quite often when you do development. If you see an error like this, don't panic. Pay attention to the error message. This error message is in fact quite clear. It says there's no JSP called edit enry, so obviously that's because I missed T there. So let's add T. Wait until the server reloads, and let's try again. Refresh, edit. So now we see this, and if we do a view source, we can see we have the hidden field here with value 2. We have the value gen. We have the message nice site coming from this and this. So this completes the do get part. If we look at do post, the situation is the same as add comment. So the do post method is already doing what a controller is supposed to do. It processes the request and returns a view, which is a redirect. So nothing needs to be changed there. And let's try this. So we'll do edit. We'll say gen, and now it becomes gen says. So now we have completed the edit. The important thing in this case is how we pass data from controller to view. Remember, we use request scope to do that. Now, the last operation is delete. If we look at delete, again, it is already doing what a controller is supposed to do, taking a request, process it, and returns a view. Here, again, the view is a redirect, so there's no need to create a JSP for it. In fact, now we are done. So now this becomes an MVC web application. As you can see, because our Servlet version is already pretty well structured with a model class and with separate servlets for separate operations, it's in fact quite easy to convert it into an MVC version. All we need to do is move HTML generation from servlets into JSP, and make sure we can pass data from controller to view or from servlet to JSP, and that is it. Okay, so this is it for this video. See you in the next one.